Okay, would the secretary please call the roll for this special board meeting?
Directors Huang,
Here.
Sethy,
Here.
Weed,
Here.
Akbari,
Here.
and Gunther.
Here. Okay,
President Gunther.
yes, go ahead.
Okay, so I am participating remotely today pursuant to the just cause basis under AB 2449 because I have a medical and physical condition that prevents me from attending the board meeting in person. But I'm glad I can be here this evening. And there's also no one over the age of 18 with me in the room.
Perfect. And then we see that Director Sethy is both here, audio and visual, which would need to happen for the entire meeting under AB 2449. And if there's any action, it would need to be by roll call vote. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Director Sethy. I gotten some word ahead of time, and I hope you're doing good tonight. You look good. So, okay.
Looks can be deceiving. Looks can be deceiving.
Well, let's see. We're ready for the salute to the flag. I'll lead the salute this evening. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic, one nation, proud, indivisible, liberty and justice. Do you have a minute? Okay, go ahead and we're gonna request public comments for matters on this notice of the special meeting.
Yeah, and if you'd like, I can just do some real quick housekeeping remarks so everybody knows how to participate. Good afternoon. On behalf of the ACWD Board of Directors, I'd like to welcome the public's participation in this special meeting of the ACWD Board. My name is Ed Stevenson. I serve as the district's general manager. Members of the public may participate in this board meeting in person or remotely by either using the Zoom application or by telephone. Any member of the public participating in person may approach the speaker's podium at the appropriate time. For those participating remotely, note that the meeting agenda and all related materials are available on the district's website at acwd.org. You may reference the instructions at the top of the agenda for how to participate using the controls in the Zoom app or your dial pad if you are participating by telephone audio. This hybrid board meeting is being recorded and will be made available to the public for future viewing. That completes my housekeeping remarks.
Okay, we'll open up for public comments. I do see that we have Kelly A. and Ken Yishimara. Ken does have his hand up. Go ahead. And there goes Kelly's. Okay, we'll take Mr. Yishimara first.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Very good.
Okay, members of the board, due to the timing of these workshops, I'm typically unable to attend most in person, but I did have a chance to review the presentation materials from the previous workshops and have some comments on the general topic of these workshops. I wanted to comment on the finding that the district supposedly will need rate increases in excess of 3% for the next few years to cover unexpected changes to the district's financial situation. I will not opine today on the merits of the greater than anticipated rate increases, but will focus on my oft-repeated request for the board to consider tiered rates. The presentation showed that approximately half of the district's expenditures to procure water is due to SFPUC water, and that the cost of such water is increasing faster than expected. It is time for the district to shift the burden of procuring additional water to those who use the most. If, in fact, a general revenue increase of 5.5% is required next year, that increase should be apportioned such that those who use less than a nominal baseline amount, for example, the 8 units per month benchmark often used, would see a 3% increase, and the remainder of the revenue increase be shifted to those who use more than the baseline amount through a higher consumption charge for usage in excess of said baseline amount. With the transition to AMI complete and the discussions of shifting to even the monthly bill, the infrastructure is ready to make such a shift in the rate structure. I urge the board to strongly consider moving towards a tiered rate structure as you plan the budgets for the future years. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ishimara. Mr. Kelly.
Thank you. Yeah, I think Mr. Nishimura's idea for tiered rates is excellent. So, a wonderful idea. You know, it doesn't have to be a lot of tiers. It doesn't have to be super complicated like East Bay Mud is doing. But the idea of having a flat rate for all the water is politically untenable in today's day and world, mainly because of the idea of equity for equity for small users, where small users should get some kind of a break, and the larger users, big users, should pay more. And you know that goes against the historic practice of this district, which has been for decades has been.
Kelly, I think we lost you.
Kelly, your your voice kind of cut off there, and you look like you're still in the meeting, but we can't hear you right now.
Let me see.
There we go. We got you.
All right. Let's see. All right. Yeah. So you know, coddling the big users was working for many decades, but no longer is something politically tenable. And the district needs to, you know, align itself with the rate policies of other benchmark districts around the Bay Area, and most of them are using tiered rates. You know, so being the outlier, being the last one or one of the few to use flat rates is a very bad idea for many reasons, but mainly because you don't want to be the lone sheep out there, the outlier. And then also on the idea of the expensive San Francisco SFPUC water, which is detailed in one of your financial analyses. One of the things that could come out of there is not just what is the minimum amount of water of their water that the expensive water that you need to buy to meet the PFAS requirements and the hardness requirements, but also what is the alternative to, is there an alternative? Is there a physical cap on how much SFPUC water you need to buy? For example, if they were to raise their rates dramatically such that the SFPUC water was more expensive than reverse osmosis, more expensive than desalination, then there'd be no reason to buy from them. You could just run your own desalination or whatever to get very expensive and very high quality water. There is a physical cap to how expensive SFPUC can raise their rates, and it's set by whatever the price of the alternatives is. And I think that if we you don't want to let them raise their rates beyond, you know, so high that there are alternatives become cheaper. And on the other hand, you don't want to go to the alternatives prematurely and go buy super expensive water that's even more expensive than SFPUC, and you know, do some kind of desalination experiment or whatever, just for the fun of it, when you could have gotten, you know, good quality water for cheaper from SFPUC. Thanks.
Thank you. There are no members of the public in the room and no more online. So with that, let's go ahead and move into the meeting. Item number 4.
Great. Thanks, President Gunther. And for our members of the public participating in the comments that you received, great comments. We appreciate the input. I would certainly encourage both of you to participate in our rates. We're going to have a whole series of rates discussion over the summer, and certainly we'll be getting into rate structures as part of those discussions, including tiered rates and other considerations. And in terms of SFP alternatives to SFPUC from the imported water supply, that'll certainly be a factor in our water resources master planning work that we're just wrapping up phase 1 now. And so when we get into the nitty gritty details in phase 2, we start talking about alternatives and analyses. That would be a great place to participate in those discussions too. But before we get there, we do want to take a step back and review the draft budget summary. So not all of the board was able to participate last week when we had our board meeting on this topic. And also we wanted to make sure that we're circling back with the board on the topics that we discussed then. So with that, I will turn it over to our Director of Finance and Administration, Mr. Wunderlich, to get us started.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. Good evening, board members, staff, and members of the public. The plan is to do a relatively quick summary of the budget. Of course, we had a much more intensive review last week. There are also more detailed materials associated with last week's meeting that are available on the website for any members of the public. We could move to the next slide. So we'll just cover some of the basics of the operating budget and CIP, and then what it all means for our long-range financial planning. Next slide. So the first thing I wanted to touch on quickly is that we have been experiencing a few things this fiscal year that have accelerated expenditures, more than anticipated. First thing identified here is that we've been able to accelerate the AMI schedule, and actually that project is now essentially considered complete with 99.8% installations, and that has increased our capital spending this year. Additionally, we're looking to spend between about 6 to 7 million more in San Francisco purchases this year compared to budget, primarily due to facility outages and water quality targets. And so that's what's been affecting our spending within the current fiscal year. Kind of looking ahead, we're also facing an unexpected nearly 9% rate increase from SFPUC starting July 1, 2024, which has increased costs by a couple $1 million in the fiscal year 24-25, as well as looking at lower water demands as water consumption has increased less than expected after the recent drought. Some other key assumptions you can see here, adjustments to employee costs consistent with negotiated labor contracts, as well as a change in the projected rate increase to maintain our financial capacity. Next slide. All right, this is a summary of the different staffing changes that were reviewed and discussed in more detail last week. This includes the addition of several positions, including an intern within the Office of the General Manager, an IT analyst within the IT group, a treatment facility operator to support startup and operation of the new PFAS treatment system, as well as a new engineer hydrogeologist to support work in the groundwater resources program. There's also conversion proposed of several existing positions from defined term to permanent based on an identified need for that work to continue. That includes a position within public affairs, as well as water conservation specialists consistent with the water efficiency master plan. And then the position in customer service would be contingent, on continued discussions with the board about a possible transition to monthly billing. So I think for purposes of the budget, we'll keep that as a defined term position. And then should there be interest in the future to make that transition to monthly billing, we would look to make a conversion at that time. We're also now seeing the staffing impacts of the AMI project. And so there's a removal of 5 vacant meter reader positions, which, as those positions have been vacated over the course of the AMI project, we have left them vacant. And so the net impact of all of these changes is a net reduction from 244 to 242 full-time regular district employees. All right, next slide. So here's a table showing our water revenues. There was the note on a prior slide about water demands going down. You can see that water revenues are down about 4% in the current fiscal year, and then down a couple of percent in the budget year based on the updated demand forecasts. Again, that's based on our best available information that we have. And I know we'll be working with the water resources team, who will be looking closely at what happens as we get into the summer and what happens with demands to see if any further adjustments are warranted to those forecasts. Next slide. And then in terms of our total expenses, you can see an increase for fiscal year 24-25 compared to the adopted budget of about $3.5 million in total operating expenses. That's all pretty much within the source of supply. There is an increase in the admin in general, and then a reduction in other operating categories. And what's going on there is primarily that's the result of our overhead rate having decreased within this current fiscal year. And as a result of that, fewer costs are allocated out to the operating units. And so, the fact that you see some of those operating units going down and A&G going up is not about actual cost changes so much as how those overhead allocations are put out due to the change in our overhead rate, which went down about 12%. And then the CIP, is proposed to go up, approximately $5 million. Next slide. All right, and then, our financial planning at the district really revolves around our general fund. The primary revenue source into the general fund is water revenue. And, water rates are really set based on meeting the targets within this fund. And so we wanted to take a minute to review where we're at in the general fund. And you can see within the current fiscal year, we're expecting to end the year about $8.5 million lower than had been projected at budget adoption. Again, that's due to the San Francisco costs and lower water revenues and AMI project acceleration. And then what you're seeing for the budget year is actually an increase compared to what was budgeted, but that's because we've added $30 million of debt proceeds to offset general fund, direct near-term general fund costs within the capital program. Obviously, long-term, the general fund will be paying those debt service costs over 30 years. But within the near term, that's why you're seeing an increase is because of the debt proceeds. Next slide. All right, and then looking at our capital expenditures, as mentioned, we're looking at a little over a $5 million increase within our suite of capital expenditures across all the different funding sources. And then the extraordinary expense projects are also identified within the CIP. We're seeing, a modest increase within that line as well. But pretty minor there. So again, overall, a little over $5 million in the budget year, but also, about $3 million within the current year. Next slide. And then it's just a demonstration of where that capital money is being invested within our system. You can see the AMI project winding down. Although completed, you're seeing significant expenses next year because we budget on a cash basis, and there is a lag between the work being done on the ground and when it's accepted and paid for by staff. So that's why you still see, I think about $5 million or so for the AMI project next fiscal year. We have some pretty significant investments right now in reservoirs, and you see that with I believe that would be under the seismic improvements, as well as significant main renewal projects, that are moving into the construction phase. Next slide. Okay, so that's kind of the overview of where we're at with the expenditures. And so now just to review what's changed with the financial planning model since the budget was adopted last June. First item, updated water demands, 2.1 million gallons per day less for the current fiscal year, and then 1.3 million for the budget year, and then long-term, kind of the new normal ongoing is 1.7 million gallons per day lower than what we previously had. But again, we'll continue to see what happens as we get into the summer and determine whether there should be further adjustments there. We've already talked about the capital and SFPUC costs within the current fiscal year. Next is higher level of new debt. And so previously we had $45 million of debt spread out over the planning horizon, and that's increased to $85 million. And that's primarily addressing higher costs within the total capital program over the planning horizon. We've mentioned the San Francisco wholesale rate increase. One of the other things we've done, traditionally, we only include grants and other forms of revenue once they're, kind of official. But we have some grants and other revenue sources that we feel are really, really likely. And so, kind of as we were putting our long-range financial estimates together, we thought it was prudent to recognize those revenues. They're spread out over the out years in the planning horizon. And because we do think that we really will get that money, and we wouldn't want to get into a financial planning process based on not having it and have to maybe take, more significant actions than we otherwise would need to. And then as mentioned previously, we've also made some adjustments to the projected water rates from 4% per year to slightly higher within the next 3 years at 5.5%, 5.5%, and then 5% before returning to 4%. Again, those are just estimates. A lot can change even between now and a July 18th workshop in that process. So this would by no means restrict the board's flexibility in what it would want to do within that rate setting process. Next slide. And so you can see that with all those updates in the model and the currently proposed budget at the end of fiscal year 28-29, we're pretty much right within $1 million of what our reserve target is in that year. Next slide. So this is just showing how the build demands have changed. As was previously reviewed, the long-term estimates are down from about 36 MGD to about 34.3, that 1.7 million reduction. Next slide. Our debt coverage ratios are still very strong, even with the additional $40 million of debt within the plan. The board policy is that red line at 200%. We're really looking at a few years that are low at about 400%, but then, really staying at approximately 600% through, those further out years. So again, with what's planned here, the district does still maintain quite a bit of financial capacity. Next slide. So comparing our revenues, operating revenues and operating expenses, including depreciation. And you can see that within this year and next year, we are looking to rely on other revenues, such as property taxes, to help cover some of these expenses. And then we kind of get back toward those revenues meeting expenses starting in fiscal year 25-26. Next slide. This is now the total revenue requirement compared not to our operating revenues, but just our water revenues. And so that includes the full capital program. And our capital program expenditures do significantly exceed estimated depreciation. So the revenue requirement does go up here. And in this case, we're going to be relying on property taxes, grants, other revenue sources, as well as potential bond issuances and accumulated reserves to fund the total needs of the district. Next slide. Then here's the updated multi-year forecast on the capital program. You can see that there's an increase of about 30 million in total capital projects within the planning horizon. Next slide. Okay, last week we reviewed a few alternative scenarios with the board, and I just wanted to quickly summarize here. And the basis of these scenarios would be things we could look at that would allow us to keep 4% annual rate increases. Again, these were not specific proposals of core things we should be looking at, but more alternatives if there was interest in further evaluating them. And so we heard pretty clearly that there was no interest in delaying pension and OPEB funding, given that long-term that is a cost increase as we add those payments into those out years in the 2030s. We did hear some interest in further exploring and understanding a scenario around taking some actions to more reliably be able to stay at the minimum San Francisco purchase level. And so we'll be working with the water resources team to prepare some information and to bring that to a rate setting workshop this summer. We're not sure if that will come already to the July workshop or if it might need to wait until August. The list of things on staff's agenda for July is getting pretty lengthy, and we do try to manage to 4 hours or less for these workshops. So we'll may need to spread a few things out to the August workshop for an initial review. But this scenario does not affect the budget because it would start in fiscal year 25-26. Our PFAS treatment system is not coming online until already a few months into the next fiscal year. So we are expecting to need to buy more than the minimum San Francisco because we don't have PFAS treatment for the entire year. So there's less flexibility with that scenario until the following year. All right, next slide. And of course, as I mentioned, that some of these things are, of course, subject to further consideration by the board as we get into rate setting. You shouldn't feel committed. There are a lot of things that could still change, in terms of understanding exactly how the current fiscal year plays out. The board approved a reserve appropriation a couple of weeks ago. We're hopeful to have savings in other areas of the budget such that we won't end up needing much of that. But again, we need to get through the year and see where we end up. Once we're done with the budget discussion in this workshop, we'll start talking about the engineering report, and that may identify some additional investments not currently in the CIP that we'll need to plan for. And so that might take things in the other direction. Depending on board interests, we can also look at some capital project deferral options, and we can bring that to the rate setting process. It is something we discussed internally as it relates to the budget. We really didn't see much that could be done within the next fiscal year, given that so much of the costs are critical projects actually already in construction. But if there were interest in some project deferrals, that's something we could look at. And again, I mentioned updated water demand forecasts. And so, if we get into the hot summer months and we see demands are higher than expected, then, we may take a fresh look in time to support rate setting at what those future demands might look like. And of course, I've mentioned debt a couple of times in terms of that going up. There's still a lot of debt capacity. So, if depending on timing and amounts of debt issuances to fund the CIP, that's always on the table too to talk about. All right, next slide. So that concludes the budget summary from last week and some of the key items as we prepare for budget adoption at the June 13th board meeting. You'll note from last week that we've removed June 27th from this because, again, pending the feedback and how the board is looking at the budget, if we're able to adopt it June 13th, my understanding is we may not need that 27th meeting for other purposes. So it would be strictly for budget adoption if needed. And so I think the goal would hopefully to be able to receive the feedback today and make whatever additional adjustments that may be requested and to be ready for June 13th. And so with that, I'll stop and just ask if there are any additional questions or feedback, or if everybody's kind of comfortable with where we're at to move forward and prep for June 13th.
Director Sethy, why don't you start us off?
Well, let me offer I didn't listen into last week's board meeting, so I'm kind of caught short, but I did go through all the presentation materials and had a brief conversation with Mr. Stevenson. My preference is to try and put a cap on rate increases of 4% and work backwards to find out how we can move forward. Number two, I am in favor of perhaps looking at some deferral on CIP projects after this upcoming fiscal year to help balance things out. Number three, I had put in a request to see how much debt capacity we have at different debt ratios, going all the way down to 200%. I believe that there's a lot of room there to play with. We've earned that opportunity to go to the capital markets with strong financials. We've exercised very little of it. And I think on behalf of all of our ratepayers, we should really take a close look on, maybe even as much as $100 million on a bond, because we're working on very serious capital projects right now, and these are multi-generational investments that deserve to be paid back over a 30-year period and not directly out of our current general fund so much. So I think we have a lot of flexibility here, and I would ask the staff to look in all directions for where we could capture some cost savings. And I realize the other attendant things that we're dealing with, like the increased cost from San Francisco, but I see that as kind of short term until we get our PFAS facility up and running. But looking for ways to minimize SFPUC water purchases certainly is good. So I would ask staff to come up with all the scenarios in which we could try and stay no more than 4% annual rate increases. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Wade.
Okay, I'm going to request that if we do have a rate increase, which I believe we will, that the entirety of it be on the service charge, not on the commodity charge. Let me give you the rationale for that. Not included in this presentation was the fact that we did not have the $10 million drought surcharge that we had last year. That went away. Even though that showed up on the commodity side, it functioned as a fixed charge. That was an additional $10 million of a fixed charge, which is gone now. We need to find ways to implement. Our water use has dropped even more dramatically. Not only have we seen about a 5% drop in actual water sales, but the AMI for residential meters with the ultrasonic will report 5% more consumption plus. So the actual loss is about 8% drop in actual water consumption. We had this argument that we could keep this strange imbalance but the reality is conservation statement. Next, we have ramped up recently on a 4-to-1 vote or directed that we ramp up our conservation efforts. We don't need additional conservation. In fact, we need just the opposite. We need to find ways for people to start to consume additional water. We're well under the state guidelines on water consumption per capita, and to maintain our operational criteria because of the conservation and this weird dysfunctional rate structure where 2/3 of our costs are on the commodity side, even though it's probably less than 20% of our cost. We're seeing, again, having to use debt to cover operating expenses, property taxes to cover operating expenses. This violates every one of our basic principles. And it comes back to an incredibly dysfunctional rate structure, which does not match fixed costs to fixed income and variable costs to variable income. It's really a bad management practice. So in short, the entirety of the rate increase on the service charge and cut back on our conservation programs. The drought surcharge, the tiered rates have been argued as needed for conservation. We don't need conservation right now. We need to sell water. We got a lot of water to sell. We've got a big operation to try and maintain. And the cost of that water is less than 20%. When you talk about San Francisco, don't let the tail wag the dog. San Francisco is less than 20% of our total water supply. The issue is water quality. And while we're meeting a critical water quality element, it's the additional cost you're paying for that water quality. But it is temporal. And it's not something you base a long-term permanent rate structure on. So hopefully we start operating in a far more responsible and business manner. Thank you.
Director Akbari? I don't have any new comments that I didn't already share last week. I think my opinions on the two alternatives that were presented remain the same. Definitely not in favor of the alternative scenario number one, and I'm open to scenario number two. I would concur with Director Sethy's suggestion as well to look into potentially seeing if we can make use of more debt to try and maintain our general fund. So I would certainly be open to that. But other than that, my comments I think I made last week.
Well, I'm just going to start by saying that for the record, that I do disagree with Director Wee's assessment or presentation and his point of view on conservation and rate structure, but we're not going to talk about that today. And we could have that discussion when the opportunity happens when we're talking about the rate structures. In terms of the staff presentation, I am satisfied with the presentation, and I definitely look forward to see what type of creative solutions and answers you come back with for scenario two.
Okay, and kind of echo the same comments that looking forward to seeing what staff can come up with. It's not going to be easy, but we've been there before and we've gotten through this, and I'm sure we're going to be able to do it again. I have faith in the staff. Further comments, concerns, Mr. Abreu? Thing?
I do, as Director Sethy has raised his hand.
Director Sethy.
Yes, I have a question. At what point are we going to conduct a new cost of service analysis?
Yeah, so that will depend on our approach in the rate setting process. And by the way, based on the discussion this afternoon, I can tell we're going to have a lot of great discussion in our rate setting workshops this summer. And we're going to cover a lot of great topics. And in terms of cost of service study, we do not. So we did a cost of service study just last year. And typically we would only do a new cost of service study every 5 years. And so if we do but to support rate adjustments in the intervening years, we would do an updated financial plan. Again, just kind of distinguishing with some of the technical jargon. So there would be a supporting study. The only exception would be is if we make any changes within our rate structure, whether that is to rely more on fixed charges, as has been suggested, whether that is to go to tiered rates, as has been mentioned in public comments, right? If we were to make any change at all in our structure and not just do a uniform across the board rate increase, we would have to do a new cost of service study specifically to support that new rate structure. But if it's just an across the board increase, we would likely do an updated financial plan, which would look and feel very similar to a cost of service study.
Let me point out that when you're using debt and property taxes to cover operating expenses, you have crossed the Rubicon. You now have a fundamentally failed budget structure and financing structure that you need to address. That requires a new rate structure, and restructuring. Hopefully we'll do it.
Yeah, if I could just clarify one thing there. I'm not sure I understand the source of why you're suggesting we're paying for operating expenses with debt. The long-range plan identifies $420 million in capital improvements and only $85 million of new bond issuances. So the debt would only be used to pay for capital projects, which is also necessary so it can be issued as tax-exempt debt, which is financially beneficial to the district.
And maybe some clarification when you said you were going to use debt to make up shortfalls in the general fund.
So the debt would be used in lieu of general fund to pay for capital projects. Because the general fund is used significantly to pay for capital projects, not just for operating expenses.
And the general fund. Okay, whether it's one step or two steps, I still get the impression we're using extraordinary financing efforts to cover our operating expenses. Thank you.
Director,
Aver-
my suggestion on looking at $100 million was specifically for our capital investments, not to fund operations.
Yeah, and based on what staff has heard this evening, again, just to quickly summarize, I haven't heard anything where we're being requested to make a specific change for the fiscal year 24-25 budget. So what you'll see June 13th will be consistent with what's been presented this evening. But I think what I have heard is a request to present a third alternative scenario that would make greater use of debt to fund the capital program. And so we will prepare that as an additional scenario along with the scenario related to minimizing San Francisco purchases when we come back in the rate setting workshops.
Well, okay.
Kelly, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. First off, when you look at the capital budget, you see that it jumped 47% from last year to this year. And this huge explosion, and then it jumped way up, and it's going to keep staying at a high level for a number of years. So the capital expenses have really jumped, and one of those was AMI. And AMI, the justification for that was we're going to find some leaks, but that wasn't going to pay for the AMI. We're going to remove 5 headcounts, but that's only what, $1 million a year, whatever. It's a small amount of money for those salaries. So those 5, eliminating 5 full-time equivalents is not going to pay for whatever, I think it was like $50 or $80 million, a huge amount for AMI. So there's no way you're going to pay for that on the labor savings. AMI was a huge thing, and then the ACWD sped up the installation of AMI to boost the rate of spending on AMI instead of spreading it out over several years, to spend more of it and do it faster. Also, a lot of the rate hikes are going to be for, we're not going to get any extra water from the state water project, but they're going to boost the property taxes to pay for huge projects. So that's how we're going to boost the fixed costs. We're not getting any water. We're just boosting up our fixed costs, and we're paying for it in our property tax bills. That's the plan, and that's what's going to happen. So my feeling is if the capital expenses are going up, they better have a good justification. And the AMI, all of it, we thought we had lots of money to pay for it, but it turns out that we don't have that much money to pay for capital expenses, and we have to be careful on where we spend the money. Are these projects, do they have a good, sound capital justification? And I would submit that accelerated AMI did not have a good, sound capital justification. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, then without further questions, I guess we can go on and move on to our next item.
Okay, so it sounds to me like staff, we do have everything we need to prepare for June 13th. So, so we will bring back the additional information in the final budget on June 13th. because it doesn't sound like we're going to need that June 27 workshop, which was reserved for a kind of an as-needed budget workshop, and also the potential to put other items on that agenda. Staff will plan to cancel that workshop. So maybe that won't be the, I don't know, the 4th or 5th meeting in June, like seem to be trying to set records in May. So likely look out for that coming your way. But yeah, the next item is our marquee item for this evening. This has to do with our engineering report, our CIP engineering report, and where we are with that report. Having done the bulk of the work, we're here to share the preliminary findings and draft results from those analyses. And one of the things the board and the public have heard an awful lot about the CIP engineering report. You've heard an awful lot about it through the budget process, and we hear about this all the time. So one of the things we wanted to do was bring back the engineering report analyses that we're, like I say, finalizing right now, make sure that you understand what this thing really is and why we do it. But another reason why we wanted to really focus on it now, especially since it's not 100% complete, is that we're talking about, planning these major infrastructure improvements and looking at priorities in the capital program for the planning period in the CIP engineering report, which is about 10 years. So obviously, whatever we do budget-wise, rate-wise, and so forth, we want the board to have this context in mind because this is what our intermediate term future looks like, and we wanted to be sort of fully transparent with the board. That said, and this is where I've mentioned how we're trying to confuse the board in the past. That said, nothing that you will see this evening is part of a proposal for a CIP change. Currently, the CIP proposal that the staff has reviewed previously as part of the budget process, that's our proposal. But this is what the future may hold. And so it doesn't pertain to the current CIP, just future CIPs. So with that, I will turn it over to our Director of Engineering and Technology, Mr. Awoke, to get us started.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. Good evening, board members, staff, and community members. So as Mr. Stevenson mentioned, the engineering report is one of the tools that staff uses to plan ahead in the midterm and short-term scenarios of ensuring reliable water supply and redundancy in our infrastructure preservation and upgrade processes. In order to meet the district's core mission of providing a reliable supply of high-quality water at a reasonable price to our customers, the board has set several strategic goals and objectives, including efficiently managing and maintaining our infrastructure, continuously improving emergency preparedness and response capabilities, and improving the cost effectiveness and value of district services. One of the tools that district uses to plan for and implement infrastructure and system preservation and upgrades is the engineering report process that Mr. Stevenson alluded to. Based on board-adopted long-range planning documents, such as the Integrated Resource Plan, engineering staff develop an engineering report which identifies capital improvement needs and programs them based on system needs, asset conditions, and availability of funding. At today's workshop, staff will be sharing with the board the findings and recommendations from the interim engineering report study and analysis. We will also highlight key assumptions and several water production and redundancy scenarios considered in order to continue to meet the district's mission and strategic objectives. I do want to remind the board, and as Mr. Stevenson mentioned, the information presented here is for board review and discussion purposes, and it's of course based on currently available information and board directives. To that extent, these assumptions and directions will likely be updated in the near future based on the outcome of the Water Resources Master Plan, which, as you know, is currently in development. I want to take this opportunity to recognize Ms. Rekai Pagunta, Mr. Ben Egger, who is in the audience, who will be making presentation, and Ms. Rosie Chan for their hard work and effort in getting us to this point and bringing this to the board. With that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Rekai Pagunta. She will walk us through staff's approach to the study, overview of the analysis and findings and next steps, and we'll be more than happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Director Sethy
Thank you,
here.
Mr.
Can
Howard.
I ask a question? This is a process question. How much time is this presentation going to take? Because I will need a 5-minute break at some point here.
We have about 40 slides, so I would assume between 45 minutes an hour, depending on, questions and answers and discussions. So anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour and a half.
Yeah, and I
Well,
would say, and Director Sethy, President Gunther and I were talking. I did shoot you a quick note in the chat, but anytime you feel like taking a quick break, we're all in the room more than willing to pause where we are. It's not a problem. And we can just resume when you're ready. So feel free to just either speak up or shoot a note in the chat.
okay, I saw your chat remark and I was just going to ask if you see an appropriate place to stop. Let's stop.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, thank you. And good evening, President Gunther and members of the board and members of the public. My name is Gunther. I'm the project engineering manager. Today we have a lot of information to present to the board. We have organized this presentation into multiple sections. As we go through the slides, we'll take a pause between the sections for any questions. First, to get everyone on the same page, I will cover the purpose of the workshop today and the process we have followed and the scope of this interim report. Next, Rosie Chan will walk us through the supply-demand gap analysis, our infrastructure planning process, and our preliminary findings and recommendations of the engineering report. And we conclude the presentation with some proposed cost packages and next steps. We have included a handout with abbreviations and definitions of some of the terms that we would be using for your reference. I'm not going to go through all those now. So the main purpose of today's presentation is to provide a transparent view of the engineering analysis and draft project proposals and their associated costs. So it's important to note at this point that not all projects included in today's presentation are included in the CIP recommendation that we brought, the CIP proposal we brought to the board last week. After a thorough financial evaluation, only approved projects will be incorporated into the future CIP. And today's presentation also includes review of our infrastructure planning criteria, which is like what's really driving our project selection and prioritization of projects. We also will be upfront with the associated costs for each of those projects. And again, our goal today is to provide a complete transparency about the proposed projects and their costs associated with the findings of the engineering analysis. So engineering report is a snapshot of our current capacity constraints, which is primarily focused on the near term, which is a 10-year horizon. So the engineering report fits within a large planning process. We have a planning portfolio process, which includes several planning documents that we refer to. Asset management plan, our main renewal program, water resources master plan, and our 5-year strategic plan. All these inform the engineering report. And these look at longer term outlook. And it's important to note that this is a light version of the report. So that means it only prioritizes no regret investments. In other words, the improvements or investments that are necessary today, which will be beneficial to the district and our customers, regardless of the recommendations from the water supply master plan and other planning, long-term planning reports. So I'll just provide a quick overview of the scope of the interim CIP engineering report. So this interim report is focused on detailed analysis of current and projected infrastructure needs, across various aspects of water supply system. And more specifically, we are focusing on 4 facility types. 1 is production facilities, 2 storage facilities, 3 pumping and boosting facilities, and transmission mains. As we go through the analysis, you'll see different sections focused on these 4 facility types. We also looked at our demands. The report considered capacity, the current capacities, with 10% contingency for the demand in the next 10 years, and with water quality considerations. So the infrastructure needs to be able to withstand disruptions and provide continued water supply, reliable water supply to our customers. So with that in mind, this engineering report also evaluated resiliency under normal operation and also redundancy scenarios for outages to major production facilities or water supply sources. So as we go through the analysis, you'll be able to see the resiliency options for under normal operation and also a couple of redundancy scenarios. So this report identified gaps between current infrastructure and our projected needs in the next 10-year duration. So with that, this is the current scope of this interim engineering report. I do want to emphasize that we did not incorporate Mission San Jose treatment plant evaluation as part of this interim engineering report. That would be evaluated as part of the water supply master plan. At this point, we confined the evaluation to our existing facilities infrastructure and what kind of improvements do we need to improve resiliency and enhance our redundancy scenario. So that's the main focus for today. With that, I will turn it over to Rosie Chan.
All right, thank you, Ms. Ipakanta. Good evening, President Gunther and members of the board, staff, and members of the public. Thank you for having me here. My name is Rosie Chan, and I would like to continue with the presentation by sharing the report preparation process. So the first step in the process is criteria development. There are 2 groups of criteria, regulatory and district non-regulatory criteria. During this step, we review prior engineering report, relevant documents, references, and acquire stakeholders' feedback to understand current challenges. The next step in the process is gap analysis. During this process, we collect necessary information and perform the preliminary supply-demand gap analysis. We additionally also perform feasibility analysis for redundancy and reliability scenarios. During the gap analysis, we identify various protection scenarios for hydraulic modeling analysis, which is the next step in the process. The hydraulic modeling is then to make sure demands are not only met quantitatively, also geographically across all the pressure zones within our distribution system. So hydraulic modeling looks at use the various protection scenarios developed from gap analysis and model the results. Based on the hydraulic modeling results and gap analysis, we identify the CIP improvements to meet the demand. So as I mentioned earlier, there are 2 groups of criteria being developed. Regulatory criteria are based on Title 22, which include max day demand. Per Title 22, the Title 22 requires the public system shall have the capacity to meet the max day demand at all time. Peak hourly demand, the PHD, Title 22 requires the system with 1,000 connections or more. We need to meet the demand 4 hours peak hourly demand. But the PHD can be met using the storage or emergency connections. Additional regulatory criteria include fire flow and minimum operating pressures in the water mains. So non-regulatory criteria are district ACWD internal criteria based on level of service goals. We'll look at these various district criteria in the next slide. Any questions? So here are the ACWD internal criteria. The ACWD criteria are based on the district policy, standards, and guidelines. These criteria include harness policy. We have to stay within the 150 ppm plus or minus 10% tolerance. Treatment capacity, we have to meet MDD plus 10% district contingency, maintaining a one pump on standby at all the booster stations for emergency. We have to meet the 80% PFAS MCLs. All of our water mains shall have the velocities no more than 5 foot per second. Our storage capacity, the storage facilities shall maintain the turnover of no more than 7 days, and time of use pumping for energy cost savings. These are all the major criteria, internal criteria for ACWD. So this slide reviews the historical demand for the last decade, 2014 to 2023. The table here shows you the max day demand that we saw in the past and associated date for each of them for each year. As you can see from this table, the highest we saw in the past was in the last 10 years was about 54 MGD. That is highlighted in red. That MDD happened occurred on year 2020. So traditionally, we have been calculating our max day demand using by applying the MDD over ADD factor to projected average day demand. Plus, we add additional 10% on top of the projected MDD. Because this is the light engineering report and there are some uncertainties with our demand projections and forecast for future, our recommendation is to go with option number 2, that is in the square box red. This is our recommendation due to some uncertainties with our demand projections. This approach number 2 simply looks at historical demand that we saw in the prior slide, 54 MGD, and add 10% district contingency on to that historical demand. So with this approach, regardless of where the projections is, regardless of where the forecast is, our number remain consistent. And 59 MGD is what we use throughout our engineer analysis. We also show the third option, which is do nothing approach, that in second pink row. So that approach simply just looked at the last decade highest demand over 54 and continue to try to meet that demand. So for this approach, there will be no engineer analysis needed. We saw that a couple of times in the past, and we can try to continue to meet that demand. So our recommendation is the option 2. Any questions? All right, moving on.
So Rosie, actually just thinking about sort of overall presentation here, what we've just shared was kind of the basis of the report. We shared the criteria that we've applied for this round of revisions. So the next thing we're going to start to do is talk about how those criteria apply to our assessment of the various types of infrastructure within the system. So this might be a good time to just pause for a brief break. We've been meeting for about an hour. So this might be a good time for a short break.
Sure. Why don't we reconvene at, take it easy, at the quarter after the hour.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Copy, Paul?
Mike's off.
Yeah.
I think
I'll have one
he's
question.
copied.
If I might ask a question on the very last slide before we took a break.
Go ahead.
These are our operational criteria, which is fine. But my experience is that when we design projects with fire flows become the design criteria in many cases, or other contingency operations. Does that come into play here? And is this really a secondary criteria to another criteria, which might be fire flows or contingency operations?
Yes, that's correct.
And I would say we have slides on that particular topic, so.
Yeah, you'll see there's like a whole cascade of different criteria that kind of flow from some other key criteria. And the criteria here, this maximum day demand, is one of those key criteria that other criteria flow from. So what you'll see is, like, for instance, you brought up storage, emergency fire flow, storage, and so forth. Certain percentages of this max day demand are what are used for some of the criteria related to storage. So you'll see those coming up in just a minute here.
Okay, no, fine. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Let's moving on. So this presentation, the assessments are broken down into 4 major facility types. The first facility type is the production facilities. So we'll take a look at the production facilities assessment in the next a few slides. So this slide shows all of the existing production facilities within the district and their associated design capacities, contractual outputs, and sustainable outputs. Before we look closer to these numbers, I would like to give some definition of what design capacity, contractual output, and sustainable output means. Design capacity is the rated capacity of a production facility as described in the permit and amendment document. Contractual output means maximum available output according to the water supply agreement. For example, our daily maximum capacity we can take from San Francisco is 24 MGD. Sustainable output means the operationally proven production that can be maintained long-term. Or in other words, the production rate a plant can sustain without causing any issues. So sustainable outputs will be used to meet our target max day demand of 59 MGD. So as you can see from this table, the total sustainable output that we have available from all these facilities combined is significantly lower than the design capacities due to various factors. For example, blender output is limited due to PFAS and hardness constraints. So here it shows 26 MGD sustainable output from blender. However, the blender output can range between 21 and 26 depending on what San Francisco hardness is coming to blending facility. For TP2 output is constrained due to source water quality and other process bottlenecks. Oops. Sorry about that. There you go. So TP2 is constrained due to source water quality and other process bottlenecks. The facility is also lacking the redundancy for certain processes such as filters and sludge processing. Diesel output is limited due to system hydraulics, and the San Francisco takeoff facilities have maximum daily purchase cap per the contract. Therefore, the total sustainable output available with all the facilities combined is 67.5 MGD, and our goal is 59 MDD. So bottom line is we will be able to meet our max day demand with all the facilities combined, with all the sustainable outputs combined. So when developing this table, we have made a few assumptions, such as we assume the San Francisco purchase agreement will remain consistent throughout the duration of this interim engineering report duration. Also, the groundwater operations will remain the same for the production facilities for the duration of this engineering analysis. Any questions on this slide?
We show Mission San Jose as being 0. Is there the potential or possibility, as we get involved in some of the current discussions with the San Francisco, that water Mission San Jose may come back in, not necessarily as in the last go around, the last design concept, but into a traditional plant for up to 8 MGD? Is that a contingency potential? Or a change in?
Yes,
agreements?
Mission San Jose Water Treatment Plant, for our members of the public is right now, it's kind of been mothballed. We took it offline around 2015 or so, mostly as a result of reduced demands, following the prior drought, and demands have stayed relatively low since then. So the thinking has been since then that ultimately we'll likely bring it back online when demands and other factors justify that. As Rosie pointed out at the beginning, Mission San Jose is one of those big question marks that's kind of hanging out there in terms of the interim and long-term plans. And part of what will inform the interim and long-term future for Mission San Jose Water Treatment Plant will be things that will be reviewed in the water supply master planning. Because, if we're going to say strategically continue to put eggs in the state water project basket, or have other water supply scenarios that may leverage that as a resource, then that would likely sort of speed up its return to service. So it's one of those things that we, in this engineering report, we did not analyze carefully or in detail because of those factors that are going to be under review shortly.
All right, thank you.
Hello, I have my hand up.
Go.
So
Yes.
one thing I brought up
Sethy.
in the past, I hope the engineering staff will at least keep it in the back of their mind. It is quite a few years out, but if and when the Los Vaqueros Reservoir project is completed and offers substantially additional capacity, and we have the Bethany or the Transfer Bethany pipeline bringing water down to the South Bay contractors, it may be that we could lease out the facility or process water for Santa Clara, which is one of the current participants, or other people that might require water south of us here. And so the plant could be recommissioned for an entirely different purpose, not related to our own water supply demands within our service area. So I just offer that to keep it in mind.
All right, will do.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director Sethy. Are there any other questions?
I have a brief comment, Rosie, just because, believe it or not, it comes up here once in a while. And I just want to kind of emphasize on this slide that you see, for instance, 22 MGD as a sustainable maximum output of water treatment plant 2. Just to kind of drive home that we could not operate TP2 at 22 MGD, even though it says sustainable, we can't actually continue. You can't rely on TP2 to operate at 22 MGD continuously. I mean, the littlest things like, a taste and odor event, algae in the source water, we always have to make adjustments within the plant. We've got to increase our ozone concentration relative to plant flow. Things like that, those little operational adjustments are done all the time, and even just maintenance on solids handling processes and so forth. So that's kind of like the maximum kind of sustainable output that we would try and gear up for a maximum day event, but we can't run that plant continuously at 22 MGD. That's just an example. So these numbers are not, cast in stone.
All right, thank you.
I'd also note that your hardness criteria of 100, what you list 125, that is below the MCL criteria. So it's another point of flexibility.
Hardness is 150 plus or minus 10%.
Okay.
Yeah, and there's no MCL for hardness. It's an aesthetic thing, and that's why we kind of have to set our own internal standards related to what we're shooting for with regard to it's uniform a hardness across our service areas we can, and something that's aesthetically as good as we can make it.
Since we're looking at peaks, it's an issue. It's not the average or mean. Thank you.
All right, moving on to the next slide. So you saw the sustainable output for all the production facilities. So here, in this slide, we show this combination. This is the most cost-effective combination with all these production facilities combined. I also mentioned that earlier that blending facility can range between 21 and 26, depending on what San Francisco hotness is coming to blending facility. Our objective is to meet the 59 MGD demand, max day demand, to stay below the hotness policy and to meet the MCL for the PFAS regulations. So these are our goals. With that in mind, the important thing to note is that we will be able to meet max day demand of 59 MGD with current conditions. But I do want to review why I said 21 MGD for blending facility, why blending facilities is limited to 21 MGD based on San Francisco hotness. So this slide, we will take a look at. I'd like to take a few minutes to walk you through this graph on this slide. So the three vertical bars on this slide represent 3 feet into the blending facility. The San Francisco is shown in blue bar. Local groundwater well supply, well water is shown in red, and the green means ion exchange treated well supply. The green bar is consistent throughout all these combinations because we are assuming there is 6 MGD ion exchange treated well supply available. So each combination I label as 1 to 5. So the scale on the left is hotness in milligrams per liter. The scale on the right is flow in MGD. The horizontal dashed line in red is our hotness target, that is 150 ppm plus 10%. That's the district policy. The 3 slanted lines represent total blender hotness with various San Francisco hotness of 20 ppm in orange, 80 ppm in red, and 120 ppm in blue. So there are many different blend ratios and combinations to produce 21 MGD from blender. However, any combinations beyond combination number 5 exceeds 80% PFAS MCL, so they are not feasible. That's why I grade those out. The only options we have is combinations 1 to 5. Assuming San Francisco hotness is coming in at 20 ppm, which is our best case scenario, we have combinations 1, 2, and 3 to stay below the hotness and still meet the PFAS MCLs. If San Francisco hotness is coming in at 80 ppm, we only have combination number 1. If you take a look at that red line, the slanted line is almost touching that red dashed line. So we only have one way of combining to produce that 21 MGD output. So in summary, there are 5 different ways to stay below 80% MCL. There are 3 different ways to stay below hotness target with 20 ppm hotness from San Francisco, but there's only one option available with 80 ppm hotness from San Francisco to meet the MDD and still comply with both PFAS MCLs and hotness policy. So this is the key takeaway from this slide, from this graph. So one of the objectives for completing this engineering report is to provide high quality water at a reasonable cost to our customers. With that in mind, the most cost-effective way is combination number 3. This combination allows us to purchase less San Francisco supply, meet the hotness target, and stay below the 80% PFAS MCL. I hope it makes sense. If you have any questions, please let me know.
Just a quick comment. I would note that PFAS is a moving target. We have about 28 or 29 ones that they're currently monitoring. Numbers might go to 15,000 if they do a total organic fluorine. So this is a great use what we have. And the good news is it takes 5 years lead time when they change the rules. So we'll have a little bit of time to respond, but this is good for now.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So Rosie,
Yes.
I'm a little bit lost, so need some help
Okay.
here. So you just mentioned that only combination or method number 3 would meet the criteria, but doesn't that assume that we have to ensure that the hardness from SFPUC is very low?
Assuming San Francisco hotness is 20
At 20.
ppm,
And how often does that occur?
Oh,
Is it pretty consistent or because you gave us a
So-
pretty high, wide hardness range? I assume that's local water versus hedge water.
so from the last 10 years, I took a look at the data. We have seen hotness at 20 ppm, higher than 20 ppm for about 24% for the last 10 years. So it is reasonable to assume during the high demand season, the hotness will be pretty low from San Francisco.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, and you're
Well-
right. It's the higher numbers here, the 80, the 120. Those are based upon local sources. When we're off of Hetch Hetchy, you know, this last spring, they were doing maintenance on the mountain tunnel and we were not receiving Hetch Hetchy water. It was local water. And those are going to be more along the lines of your 80, your 100. What this is looking at is constraints, given all those potential operating conditions. And Rosie's 100% right. Generally, we're receiving the very low hardness water in the high demand periods. And so we're not going to get pinched just this bad kind of all the time. So
Okay.
it's not meant to show, you know, kind of normal conditions. It's just like if you combine all those constraints, this is what those modes might
So,
look like.
so basically, like, this is the scenario modeling, right, based on a lot of assumptions. So we're saying this is the most frequently occurred scenario at about 20.
Yeah, the
Okay,
orange
I can
bar
buy
should
that.
represent, you know, most of the time.
Okay.
And when they're at the higher hardnesses, you know,
Those are
demands,
assumptions.
capacity at the blender is less stressed, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
And again, beware of San Francisco. They're spending $6 billion now. The current mindset, none of that is for pure Hetch Hetchy water. It's all local flows or Los Vaqueros, 20,000 acre feet of dedicated storage. But that's not high quality water. And so the San Francisco supply will be fond memories of the very low single digit hardness year round that we had in the past.
All right, thank you. Moving on to the next slide. There are no other questions. So let's review what we saw in the previous slide in a simpler way. So under a normal scenario for today's conditions where every facility is running, we are able to meet the max day demand of 59 MGD. Under this specific combination that I'm showing on my slide, we have a total available output of 62.5 MGD, and our target is 59 MGD. Therefore, we have a surplus of 3.5 MGD. We expand our analysis to look at redundancy scenario number 1 without TP2 as shown here. So if we lose TP2, total sustainable output from remaining facilities have decreased to 40.5 MGD. So there is the deficit of 18.5 MGD. So this is, our goal is 59 MGD. So this is not for 1 day, max day condition. The scenario looks at, we will not be able to sustain our demand if the demand goes above 40 MGD without TP2. So any days, any number of days that demand exceed 40 MGD, 40.5 MGD, that's how many days we will not be able to meet our demand without TP2. So for the last 10 years, I took a look at the data and the number of days that we have exceeded 40.5 MGD for the recent couple years ago was about 179 days in a year. So just to give an idea of how many, we are looking at extended outage or TP2 for this scenario. So the redundancy scenario number 2 is if we lose diesel. If we lose diesel plant, our sustainable output dropped to 43 MGD. If we're not counting the direct takeoff supply. So the objective of this scenario is we want to optimize our SBA supply and not on the San Francisco supply. So that's why the direct takeoff bubble is outside the bucket. We're not including that in our analysis for this scenario. our goal is 59, therefore our deficit is 16 MGD. If we want to include direct takeoffs supply from San Francisco, then our deficit will be 5 MGD. Hope that makes sense. Any questions? So we want to take a look at the redundancy scenario 1 without TB2. You saw in the earlier slide that we will not be able to meet our demand if we lose TB2. So this slide reviews how can we, what improvements do we need to make and what kind of contributions from remaining facilities to make up the deficit of losing the TB2 to meet our 59 MGD demand. There are many different ways to mix and match our production facilities to produce 59 MGD. However, our focus here is to optimize San Francisco supply and our local groundwater supply. So with that in mind, we are showing 3 different lines, rows, options here. Remember, the objective is to meet the demand to stay below the hardness and to stay within the PFAS, 80% PFAS MCL. Under the current conditions, which is shown in pink row number 1, we are not, so we have to increase our blending facility to 40 MGD in order to meet our 59 MGD demand if we lose TB2. So all 3 lines shows blending facility coming in at 40 MGD. So with the option 1, line number 1, which is considering this is our current conditions, we will be able to meet our demand, but our hardness and our PFAS here, the driver is PFOS. So I show PFOS as the one constituent here. So both of them are exceeding the limit. So this is number 1 is not feasible. Line number 2 helps us achieve our water quality goal by expanding the ion exchange treatment facility to 15 MGD. And with that, we'll be able to stay kind of in the 80% MCL. If you take a look at the PFOS cell, it's showing 3.22. So we'll be able to meet the 80% PFAS MCL, but our hardness is still above the limit, is 209. Option 3 will help us meet both hardness and PFAS. But this option requires further guidance from Water Supply Master Plan to provide PFAS-free and hardness-free supply to blending facility. So row number 2 is our most viable option for this interim engineering report. This option allows us to utilize existing water supply portfolio to meet the demand for TB2 outage scenario and stay below 80% MCL, but we will be exceeding the hardness limit. So district will need to have the flexibility in the hardness policy. Any questions?
Mayor, I see new source of supply with a question mark.
Correct.
What does that potentially include?
It requires further guidance from long-term master plan from water supply.
Oh, okay.
A new source of supply. There is no PFAS and no hardness.
Thank you.
All right, now let's review the redundancy scenario number 2. If we lose desal, what will it take to produce 59 MGD and still meet the hardness and PFAS and meet the demand? As you can see from here, immediately we cannot produce 26 MGD from TB2. So this is not feasible for all these options that are shown here. As mentioned earlier, there are different ways to mix and match, but our focus for this scenario is to optimize the SBA supply and local groundwater supply. That's why we are not counting any of the available direct takeoffs, San Francisco takeoff facilities. Total blender output is increased to 33 MGD. if we lose, to supplement the loss of protection from diesel. And all three options, as I mentioned, are not feasible today because we cannot sustainably produce 26 MGD from TP2 without making TP2 process improvements. So option one, line one is what we have today. Unless we make any TP2 improvements, we will not be able to meet our demand. Line two, additionally, line one, we will be exceeding the hardness and PFAS MCLs. The line two helps us meet the PFAS MCL, 80% PFAS MCL by expanding the ion exchange treatment plant to 15 MGD. But line two also exceeds the hardness limit. And this is with San Francisco coming in at 20 ppm. Similar to the previous scenario, if the line three is showing if there is the new source of supply, which has no hardness, no PFAS, then we'll be able to meet hardness and PFAS. However, this option requires further guidance from Water Supply Master Plan. All of these options requires TP2 process improvements. And road two is our most viable option for this interim engineering report because this option allows us to utilize existing water supply portfolio to meet the demand for diesel outage scenario. However, hardness, we will be exceeding the hardness limit. Does that make sense?
Yes. At one time, we had a blending plant, the largest blending plant in Western United States at the well field. Have we considered to a dehardening facility, either in possible tandem with our ion exchange, so that the product water would be lower hardness?
Yeah.
Yep. So yes, we have, and over the years, we looked at different ways of doing that. That's obviously going to be part of our continuing look at our mix of production facilities. That was an ion exchange facility, the Manuel J. Bernardo softening plant. We're using a different form of that same kind of process for PFAS treatment. And so this is kind of one of those areas where CIP engineering report and the long range CIP and the water supply master planning kind of feed off one another. So Rosie's pointing out, these are the constraints that we'd be operating sort of in the near term. But, as one of the things that can be considered in the water supply master planning is if we had another source of supply, maybe it's ion exchange of additional softening of existing well water, coupled with additional PFAS treatment. Could that satisfy these same objectives and meet these criteria? So I think that's kind of an example of where these two sort of approaches kind of feed off one another. One thing I'll just also reiterate, Rosie already said it, but when we look at these numbers and you go, wow, that's really bad, right? But remember, this is what the world would look like on sort of in a scenario where we're running at maximum day demands and we lose a major production facility. It could easily happen, and that's something that we're trying to understand what the world would look like in that scenario and be ready to implement common sense things as part of other things that we do to try and accommodate that situation, right? I mean, job one, we have to provide high quality water to our customers. We can't just run out. So these are the things that Rosie's looking at here. So under this scenario, hardness at the blender, 190 milligrams per liter, that's a significant deviation from our objective, but it's during maximum day conditions, and it assumes significant issue like desal went out. So
that's a peak, and it's not the average.
Right.
And then we also had different parts of the district at one time had far wide ranges in hardness depending on the neighborhood.
Right.
Or community. All right, thank you.
All right,
District's okay.
let's continue to the next slide. So going back to this diagram that we saw before and summarizing our findings, in the normal scenario, we'll be able to meet 59 MGD max day demand. We'll be able to comply with hardness, and we'll stay within the 80% PFAS MCL. This is But this option, this normal scenario requires all the facilities running with their sustainable output. So we have little flexibility with normal operation scenario. For the redundancy scenario, we saw that we're able to meet the demand. However, we will not be able to meet the hotness without the, we will not be able to meet the hotness, and we will not be able to stay below the PFAS MCL, 80% PFAS MCL. And the redundancy scenario two, if we lose diesel, we do not meet MDD, 59 MGD, MDD, max day demand, without making process improvements at TP2. We will not be able to meet our hotness policy targets, and we do not meet PFAS MCL without ion exchange expansion. So the next slide will give the summary of all the recommended projects. So under normal scenario, there will be no CIP improvements recommended. Under redundancy scenario one, if we lose TP2, we'll need to have ion exchange treatment expansion to 15 MGD, and either take hotness exception or policy exception, or look at alternative analysis for hotness control. And redundancy scenario number two, if we lose diesel, we will need to make TP2 process improvements, ion exchange treatment expansion, either take hotness policy or exception, or look at the alternative analysis for hotness control. These are the summary of the recommendation for all these three scenarios that are presented here. Any questions on this slide? So this concluded our production facilities assessments. Before I move on to storage facilities assessments, are there any questions on everything that was presented related to production facilities?
No. So Rosie, you basically perform a stress test on the system.
That is correct.
Okay. Using the normal operating condition based on your assumptions. Okay, thank you.
Sethy.
And I also, of course, trust that if Mr. Brew had any questions or comments, he'd know to raise his hand, and we'll be sure to pause.
All right, continuing on to storage facilities assessments. So there are the storage capacity is made up of three types, which includes operational storage, which includes equalization storage and time of use storage, and fire storage and emergency storage. There are different criteria for various types of storage as shown in this table. Most of these criteria are regulatory criteria, except for time of use. Time of use is district criteria. And in our engineering analysis, we looked at these various criteria in order to determine whether we have sufficient storage in our facilities. So from our engineering analysis, we saw that all zones have adequate storage capacities with the exception of APN zone. APN zone does not have sufficient equalization storage nor time of use storage. The total deficit in the APN tank is 0.23 million gallons. So moving forward, our plan is to perform a comprehensive review of the APN zone and re-evaluation of redundancy and reliability needs for individual zones as well as the subzones. Any questions before I move on? So bottom line is we currently we have deficit in APN zone. So our engineering analysis not only looked at the storage capacities requirements, we also looked at the water age requirements. So one of the criteria for storage facilities is to maintain a maximum turnover of 7 days. We have been experiencing some water quality issues at our Patterson Reservoir, and therefore we have used the hydraulic modeling analysis to come up with a solution to address this high water age issue that we have been experiencing. In the next slide, we will take a look at the hydraulic modeling result to address this issue. So here is the hydraulic modeling analysis. The solution that was recommended from the modeling is to add a low head booster pump station to address the high water age at Patterson Reservoir. And this graph shows the solid blue line, which is our current base condition. And with the improvement, we will be able to improve our turnover to approximately 2 days. That is represented in the dashed blue line in the graph. And in the map bottom right, the map shows the pipeline improvements in red, but this pipeline improvements is already reflected in our existing main renewal program. Any questions on this hydraulic modeling analysis result and findings?
Yes, one question from Director Sethy. Is the low head booster pump station internal in the reservoir, or is this something external?
It will be external, but we'll have to do the scoping and study for the project.
Are you recirculating water, like there's water coming into the booster station and then exiting back into the base reservoir? Is that the way it works? How do you get the turnover in the water?
I can help answer this question. This is Rekha Ipaganta.
To get close to the mic on that one, especially. Thanks.
So the way it's proposed is it's a pump station that would pull water from the reservoir and pump it into the distribution system. This is externally forcing water age condition within the reservoir by putting high pressure to get the water exit the reservoir. So it's not recycling within the reservoir like the recycle pumps we typically see for water age mitigation, but this is an external pump station.
I see.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions on this slide? All right. So the next slide will look at the storage facilities findings and recommendations. So all zones, all pressure zones have adequate fire suppression storage, emergency and equalization storage. With the exception of APN zone, we'll have to do further analysis and investigation of the APN area to determine the deficit in the APN tank. And the recommendation is to install a new low head booster pump station to address the high water age at Patterson Reservoir. This summarizes our findings for storage facilities.
Just a quick note for the record, because you see the word emergency and then you see APN doesn't have, it's lacking. Well, just to confirm kind of for the record, you saw all those layers of different criteria for storage. Emergency is one of them. There's a couple of different types of emergency storage. The tank has adequate capacity, meets all the regulations and so forth and so on. But what we're really talking about is when we add our own additional sort of belt and suspenders criteria to optimize things like equalization and time and water available for time of use pumping to avoid additional energy costs and so forth. Under the higher demand conditions, we're kind of close to the bubble. You saw Rosie's assessment about 230 gallons of delta, 230,000 gallons, which is really, really small for storage like this. So that's why she suggests, well, now it's time to take a very close look at APN to see whether or not, our own imposed criteria related to, say, time of use pumping, whether that makes sense. At 30% of the total reservoir or total tank capacity, does it make sense in this one tank, given how the demands in that zone actually work, right? If it was 28%, would we still have adequate margin to stay out of, peak pricing, energy pricing times, right? So that requires like an additional level of detailed review. And so that's what she's reflecting. She's not saying that we can't sustain an emergency in that zone at all.
Thank you for the clarification. Any other questions? All right, so next major facility that we'll be reviewing is booster stations capacity assessment. So here is the simplified distribution system diagram. As you can see from this diagram, all of our production facilities are located in zone 1, which means all the water in the upper zones must be pumped. And we use hydraulic modeling, as I mentioned in the prior slide, that to see how we can meet our demands across all the pressure zones. One of the criteria for booster stations is to maintain a pump on standby at all times for emergencies. So we use this criteria to determine in our hydraulic modeling analysis to identify the CIP improvements. So hydraulic modeling is then based on various production scenarios that we have identified during the gap analysis, and based on the results, here are the recommended findings and recommendations. We'll have to make some improvements in Whitfield zone 2 and zone 3 area to add additional pumps and to maintain a pump on standby to meet the criteria. And Whitfield Zone 3 booster station is currently included in the current CIP. So we'll be looking at this, the entire Whitfield area to address this issue. And then B16 was installed as a temporary booster station to pump water to Zone 3. So one of the recommendations is to add an additional pump to meet the criteria and convert this to a permanent booster station, which meets the district standards. Because this B16 is a critical facility for our operations, so we'd like to convert that to the standard permanent booster station. So these are the findings and recommendations related to the booster stations. So before I move on to transmission mains capacity assessment, are there any questions on booster stations? All right, let's take a look at our transmission main capacity assessment. Here are the key criteria. There are other criteria, however, these are the key major criteria. Our transmission mains needs to maintain the maximum velocity of 5 foot, needs to be no more than 5 foot per second velocity. And our minimum operating pressures in the water mains shall be 40 PSI at all times without fire flow. These are the key criteria for our transmission mains. So hydraulic modeling is used to see, for the normal operation scenario. So from the hydraulic modeling results, this map shows some of these pipelines that have high velocities. Those are shown in red. These pipelines do not meet the criteria of being below 5 foot per second. However, they don't impact significantly to system hydraulics. However, they are identified because they do not meet the criteria. Any questions on this?
These are all for current operations.
Correct.
When we were talking about the IRP, a request was made that we look at what would happen if we would lose one or more of our major water supplies for 6 months or more. Has that been modeled, or can it be modeled? And so that'd be the question.
So yes, we part of the production scenarios, there is the redundancy scenario that was modeled in addition to the normal operation scenario. All right, I would like to turn it over to Ms. Gunther to talk about the main renewal program integration.
Thank you, Rosie Chan. So I'd like to take a moment to review our main renewal program. This context is important here as we talk about the next the improvements that we are going to recommend based on the engineering report modeling for transmission mains. Director Wade, going back to your question, have we analyzed extended outage as part of this analysis? That is the scenario, redundancy outage scenario that we looked into. So that considered extended outage of a major supply or production facility. So this analysis, as I go through the slides, you'll see a redundancy scenario where we talk about what kind of improvements would be necessary if one of the major facilities are out for extended duration.
Where that came in particular, as my understanding is that Whitfield, the ability to transfer water from one area of the district to another was the capacity of Whitfield became a critical element there. So sizing it a little bit larger, would that give us more flexibility to be able to operate with the loss of a major water source?
Yeah, that's certainly something that we have evaluated as part of this process. I'll go through that information in the next couple of slides. Before we go through the engineering report analysis, I want to take a step back and provide a refresh on where our main renewal program is and some of the approaches that we have discussed with the board through 2 years ago related to our main renewal program, specifically related to our ramp-up process. So we needed a ramp-up approach to achieve 3 objectives for the district. One is to maximize economic value by mitigating premature renewal of our existing water mains without overspending in the program. That's objective 1. And number 2 is minimize our maintenance cost and reduce our burden on maintenance resources. And number 3, with technological advancements, we would like to leverage technology specific to trenchless construction and rehabilitation approaches. So we'd like to wait and optimize or use those additional technological advancements as part of the program. So we evaluated the proper rate at which we could accelerate the program, and that's what is presented on this slide. So this is the ramp-up approach that we have presented to the board 2 years ago, and the red line indicates our projected leaks if we do nothing. That means in the absence of a main renewal program, our leaks are going to climb to about 300 leaks per year. And with a main renewal, with this proposed ramp-up approach, our leaks are going to be much more manageable. So the key takeaways, there's a lot of information on this slide, but I'll summarize the key takeaways from this slide. 1, by the end of 2035, the repairs will cross a maximum of 150 leaks or repairs per year if we do nothing. So with ramping up approach, if we proceed with the same ramp-up approach for main renewals, the repairs that we need by end of 2035 will be reduced to about 135 per year, which is much more manageable, and that's consistent with our historic repairs that we were able to manage. And this chart represents all asbestos cement pipe removal, and the entire ACP removal would be, the ACP pipes would be replaced by end of 2080. And the replacement of every pipe is built into our main renewal program. So every segment in our distribution system is currently programmed into our main renewal program. So with that context, I also want to provide a quick overview of where we are today and what is planned as part of the main renewal program within the engineering report horizon, which is the next 10 years. That's what we are looking at. So in the next 10 years, as part of the main renewal program, this is already in the proposed CIP. We have about 20 miles of new pipeline that comprises of all those 8 different segments, different projects, for a total estimated cost of $175 million. So these are already programmed into the CIP. And then the segments that are shown in green, those are already in progress, and those are also programmed in the CIP. The projects that are in progress add up to about 10 miles. So this is where currently we are focusing on the main renewal program. So now going back to the engineering report, I'm switching from our main renewal program, which is already programmed as part of our CIP recommendations. Now switching back to our engineering report recommendations, this is based on our hydraulic modeling. So this is under normal operation, where every single facility is up and running and fully functional. So these are the improvements that are identified based on the engineering interim report. There are some areas where, again, this is based on the established criteria of maximum velocity and minimum operating pressure of 40 PSI, with 20 PSI for fire flow conditions. So using that criteria, these are some of the areas that were identified for improvement under the engineering report. As Rosie mentioned before, the consequence of deferring these projects is very low because what we would be seeing is exceedance of velocity beyond 5 feet per second, so which is low consequence under these contingent conditions. This is another scenario where we evaluated reliability and redundancy scenario. So for this particular scenario, TP2 is out of service for extended duration. Under that scenario, these are the improvements that are identified as part of the engineering report recommendations. So one is there are three major improvements that were identified under the redundancy scenario, which is specifically for TP2 outage. One is pipeline, a new transmission pipe would be necessary, which is about 5 miles. That's shown in red on the chart, which connects blender facility, which becomes a critical facility at that point, and to transmit water from blender to the southern part of the system. And then the second improvement that was identified was improvements to Whitfield Zone 2. This is based on the resulting findings indicating that the operating pressures are on the edge, ranging at a low operating pressure. So to improve cycling of Whitfield Reservoir, as the system head is very high for the reservoir to drain, there are some improvements that were identified for improving cycling for Whitfield Reservoir by improving pump station. And then the third improvement was adding a throttling valve. This is a unique function to the district, and this is generally a standard acceptable functional operating function for water systems. However, for the district, we are going to try this unique scenario here. So this throttling valve, it creates a restriction in the flow path, which can be adjusted. So by partially creating differential pressure, we will be able to force the flow in the direction that we want it to go. So that's the intent of adding this throttling valve. And this was proposed as part of the hydraulic modeling evaluation. And the alternative to throttling valve would be adding a pump station and additional pipeline improvements, which is going to be a lot more expensive than making some adjustments to the by using this valve functionality.
Director Sethy, hands up.
Yes, I have a question here specifically on this topic. So in a previous slide, we were talking about the lack of turnover at Patterson Reservoir, and yet here you're trying to reduce the flow to Patterson. And when you say push it southward, I interpret that to mean toward in the direction of South Fremont or Union City. So try to explain that to me. It seems a little contradictory. And Sequoia is right by, say on the Sequoia are right at the intersection of pit 1 and 2.
Yeah, so in this scenario, TP2 is out. So what we have noticed is there is a abnormal drawdown of the reservoirs because of insufficient supply moving towards southern part of the system. And what's happening is when blender is producing at a very high flow rate, the water is taking the path of least resistance because of the hydraulics and dynamics within the system. So the water tends to flow towards Patterson to the western side of the system. And we already have water age constraints with Patterson because of the way hydraulically it's located. So this is going to exacerbate the problem there. So that's why adding a throttling valve will force the flow to change direction. Now the path of least resistance is going to be towards southern side of the system.
Okay, now I get it. So, does this mean there's an elevation drop between the blending field and heading out toward Coyote Hills because you're getting down to sea level? So it's going at the flow of gravity? Is that
So
part of it?
this is that's a great question. The valve will be designed very carefully because the adjustments will be made in such a way that the differential pressure will only create resistance, external resistance to the flow path, so that it doesn't change the water supply balance within the system. So that's part of the evaluation and the design. So usually these are designed in such a way that the adjustments are made in such a way that the water system is still balanced.
Is this a reasonable expense?
Yeah, this is much more reasonable than adding a pump station and pipeline infrastructure.
Thank you. I got some education here.
Okay, thank you. And I'll move on to the next slide. So with that context on the main renewal program, as well as the improvements that were recommended as part of engineering report evaluation, as you have seen, we have seen two different sets of recommendations. One is under normal operational scenario. We do have some bottlenecks that we have seen in the earlier slide, but those bottlenecks are primarily because of our criteria, established criteria, where if velocity exceeds 5 foot per second, or operating pressure exceeds, goes below 40 PSI, then there will be a problem. So those were identified. And as I mentioned, the consequence is very low because those are only going to happen during contingencies. And there is factor of safety built into this pipeline infrastructure. So they will still be able to handle exceedance beyond 5 feet per second. And the maximum we have seen during the analysis was up to 8 to 9 feet per second, but that's going to be short term. So the proposal as part of the engineering report is, as we already have a main renewal program and every pipe segment is accounted for in the main renewal program, we are going to integrate engineering report recommendations into the main renewal program recommendations. So this is it's two-folded approach. One is we take engineering report transmission capacity recommendations, both for adding new transmission mains, adding a throttling valve, and also upsizing our existing mains. And we combine those, integrate those with the main renewal program. So going forward, currently, as you remember, our main renewal program is prioritized based on likelihood of failure and consequence of failure. It's a product of likelihood and consequence of failure. So going forward, we'll be considering the criteria from the engineering report and apply upsizing of mains, and this would influence prioritization decisions. So with this approach, we'll be integrating engineering report recommendations into the main renewal program.
So Rika, I have a question. I noticed that you model for the transmission lines, you model scenario 1. Did you model scenario 2?
So in this case, we modeled scenario 1, which is a TP2 outage, which is the worst case of the both scenarios.
Okay, so
we did model both scenarios. I would like to confirm with Rosie Chan. For both desal and TP2 scenarios, we modeled during the hydraulic modeling evaluation. We looked at both scenarios.
Okay.
If TP2 is out, what happens to a distribution system? Similarly, we looked at when desal is out, what happens to a distribution system. Okay. But between those two, the worst case is TP2 outage because we are losing complete supply in the southern part of the system. So that's causing more issues to the distribution system. So that's why we use that as our final recommendation for infrastructure improvements.
So would it be fair to say then if we implement the recommendation for scenario 1, that would address any potential model shortfall for scenario 2? I see Rosie nodding her head. Okay, I assume that's a yes. All right, thank you.
So this concludes the transmission main recommendations. Just summarizing, for the transmission mains, we looked at the normal scenario where every facility is operating. We identified some upsizing of mains that would be combined with the main renewal program. We also identified a new transmission main as part of the main renewal assessment, and that is going to be incorporated into the main renewal program as part of the future CIP. And we'll have some cost estimates associated with what would it cost to upsize an existing main as part of the main renewal program. For example, if we are planning to renew or replace an existing main, which is 12-inch, but based on the engineering report recommendation, if we need to upsize from 12-inch to 18-inch, what would be the incremental cost? So we'll come up with those incremental costs in the next few slides. With that information, I will turn it over to Rosie Chanford to talk about the summary of findings and draft recommendations.
Thank you, Ms. Ipokunda. So we have reviewed all these 4 major facilities for interim engineering report. Now let's review all the findings and recommendations for all these scenarios that we have gone through in this presentation. So this table summarizes all the findings for the 3 different scenarios that we saw. Under normal conditions, normal operation scenarios, the only improvement that is recommended is pipeline improvements due to velocity being higher than 5 foot per second. For redundancy scenario 1, without TP2, the improvements include 15 MGD ion exchange treatment, facility expansion, the pipeline capacity improvements, the width field zone 2 and zone 3, pumping capacity improvements, addition of the throttling valve, and either take hardness exception or come up with the hardness control alternatives. For redundancy scenario number 2, with diesel outage scenario, the recommendations include 15 MGD ion exchange treatment, expansion, TP2 process improvements, hardness control, or take hardness exception. The last column shows CIP improvements to add additional reliability to our distribution system. So for example, Patterson Reservoir project not only improves water age within the reservoir, but also enhances the desal operations. By making improvements to B16, we are not only meeting the criteria of maintaining a pump on standby, but also achieving the enhanced reliability to meet the upper zone demand. And Tamrex nose tank will be looking at further investigations in the overall APN zone. These are the summary. This lists all the improvements that we have seen so far in this presentation. Any questions on this? Director Sethy has.
Yes, I have some input here. Thank you for an excellent presentation. There's a lot to learn here. I anticipate at some point in the future, we're going to have to make some decisions and trade-offs as to what we want to invest in. One thing that would be really helpful on this last slide is some kind of scoring by staff. You know, 1 through 10 items here, whatever it is, in terms of priority requirements for the district. And then associated with that would be an estimated ballpark cost of what that improvement investment requirement is. So that would be really helpful to know in the future. Thank you. Again, an excellent presentation.
Just to be clear, this is not the last slide. This is a summary of the stuff we have covered so far. We have a few more, maybe 10 more slides that show the risk scoring and the cost estimates that you mentioned, Director Sethy. So if and when Rosie continues with the presentation, you will see some of the responses to your questions.
Hey, great minds think alike, right?
Correct. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Are there any other questions? If not, I'd like to move on to the next slide. The next slide will review how we score each, what kind of methodology we use to evaluate each CIP project. So we evaluate each CIP project against this matrix. Each project is given a risk score, which is a product of probability and impact. There are two kinds of impacts or consequences. One is negative impact, threats, and another one is positive impact, opportunities or benefits. So each CIP improvement is given two risk score, one for threats and another one for opportunities or benefits. Final risk scoring for each project is plotted in the matrix to determine its criticality and priority. Any projects that end up in the red shaded squares mean they are high priority projects, so they should be addressed soon. Any projects that end up in the orange shaded squares mean they are medium priority projects. Anything in gray color shaded squares mean they are not high risk project, therefore they could be deferred and delayed to a later time. This is what we use to evaluate our CIP projects and prioritize them. Any questions on this slide? All right. So I summarized the projects into this simple matrix, 2x2 matrix, which shows the cost benefit relationship. Any projects that are identified in quadrant 1, which is the top right, quadrant 2, which is the top left, and quadrant 3, that is bottom left. Those three quadrants projects are included in the recommendations. These projects provide high benefits and high opportunities. The quadrant 2 projects are low cost, high benefits, so they should be given the high priority. Quadrant 1 projects are high cost and high benefit, so we need to focus on those projects. Quadrant 4 projects require further analysis. Before we proceed with these projects, we will have to reevaluate and make further investigations. Any questions on this slide? All right, with that, I would like to turn it over to Mr. Egger to continue with the packages.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Chan. Good evening, President Gunther, members of the board. My name's Ben Egger. I'm Project Engineering Supervisor here at the district. So far, we've seen the details of a fairly extensive technical review of our water system. Ms. Chan just shared the cost benefit and kind of skipped the whole rabbit hole between going down the rabbit hole between that PMBOK assessment and provided a summary of the cost benefit matrix. What we haven't yet, which will help us navigate future investment planning. What we haven't yet done for you is contextualize the costs. So that's what I'm about to do here. I will say that these costs are preliminary and have not been included in the I think it's been said maybe 3 times already, have not been included in the mid-cycle budget that's up for review in the June board meeting. And not to bury the lead, what we have not done is we've not included in our presentation our final investment recommendations or financial analysis that would be necessary to finalize the recommendations. So that's included in our next steps. Okay. So in line with the analysis that you just heard, we had so normal operating conditions, and as well as under outage and redundancy style conditions. So what we did here with the costs is package up, system resiliency, investment needs under normal conditions. And then next, I'll show you a package for system redundancy under outage conditions, under those outage scenarios. Okay, so under normal condition, and so on this slide, this is a summary of what we achieve with this package. So you heard that we're okay under normal operating conditions. We have the production facilities we need. You saw that we've done 50 plus MGD as an MDD, 3 out of the last 5 years, we can do it. And we have 6 MGD of IX treatment in construction right now. However, some investments are required in the distribution system to support that normal operating scenario, that MDD, as well as some investment in the resiliency of the TP2 facility so that we can sustain that sustainable output. So it's with this package under this normal operating conditions, we can achieve the hardness criteria, storage criteria, increase reservoir turnover to meet that criteria, meet our boosting criteria, meet our minimum operating pressure criteria. And so included in that package is the Tamarack Knolls tank project, which is in the existing CIP. We have, but as you heard, Rick, definitely that zone 2 TK, Tamarack Knolls, requires further capacity analysis and is fairly contingent on future demand factors and profiles. So we have a placeholder in the CIP. What we've included here is just for transparency, sort of the upper bound of the funding need to build out a full tank facility, storage facility. But again, I don't think that is being recommended here. What's being recommended is further investigation to that project. And then for the Patterson Reservoir Low Head Booster Station, which is to adjust the hydraulic grade to help move water out of Patterson and assist with the turnover. That's a new project. It's a booster station project, so you can see the cost there. So those are the storage facility projects that would be required. And then a booster station facility improvement, which is the B16, so we can get the N+1 pumping, which is our district criteria. So you can see in the total CIP estimate, as well as what's existing in the CIP at the moment, and then the delta, the new funding we would need to achieve this package. And of course, the biggest component of that new funding need is Tamarack Knolls, which has a big question mark next to it. So unless there are questions about that, I'll move on to the package of projects that we would need to achieve the redundancy scenario. So this is when we have outages at TP2 or desal. What do we need to both improve our production, but also improve our distribution system so we can move the water from those sources that have been improved? And again, some of these projects are already in the CIP, so we'll identify those on the next table. Okay, this is a little bit longer list, but starting with the production facility type, the IX expansion, I don't think that is a new number. The 15 million is a new number. We built the IX facility with future proofing in mind to accommodate sort of regulatory uncertainty, as well as our commitment to our water quality mission. And so that is the cost to expand the IX facility. TP2 process enhancements, both to improve the resiliency, but also to improve the sustainable output. We already have a package in the CIP a project in the CIP to make improvements at TP2 for resiliency, so of $3 million. So we'd be adding $3 million to that project also. The next line item is the infrastructure investment sort of category, what would be required. And so here we're assuming the like an RO facility for hardness treatment at the blender. I think that's $60 million. That's not a new number. I think the board may have seen that previously under another study, but that's an example of an infrastructure solution to the hardness control there at Blender. And then moving on to storage facilities. So Tamarack Knolls again turns up, as well as the Patterson Reservoir Lowhead Booster Station for a total of $30 million. And the booster station improvements, the new one that we hadn't previously discussed is the B16 improvements. That project's actually already in the CIP, so there's no new funding required for that. In that Whitfield Zone 2, Zone 3 improvement project, we have a project in the CIP because we know this. It was already known this was an area of deficiency in our distribution system, but there's additional funding placed against that to be able to sustain an outage scenario as well. The table continues to our transmission mains. You heard from Ms. Input Gunther. Well, actually, I'll put a pin in the main renewal augmentation. I think that's the next slide. But under transmission mains, we have the throttling valve facility here, which, as you heard, is a valve that will artificially sort of augment the hydraulic grade in the distribution system to help us push water south under certain conditions, under these outage redundancy conditions, as well as some emergency preparedness, minor improvements. So the total there of additional proposed budget is $111 million, but that includes $60 million for an RO facility, just because we thought that would be a familiar number and style of solution. I don't think we're recommending that as the hardness control solution. We're sort of deferring that to future work that the district is doing. So that leaves us with, I wanted to underline the $51.6 million is the number without that RO facility that's required for this package. So the main renewal program, we already have that main renewal program. It has its ramp up built into the CIP already. There's some augmentation required, and certainly that augmentation is for capacity improvements that we've identified through this process. Of course, those projects would have to be done open cut. You can't line and improve the capacity of a pipe. But this is an incremental cost, assuming open cut trench, a main renewal. This would be the incremental cost to upsize those mains, is what you see in the first line. On the second line there is a brand new pipeline. That's a new transmission pipeline that we went through from Blender to move water south under those. That's only triggered under the TP2 redundancy scenario. For a total of $44 million that would need to be added to the main renewal program. Okay, so hopefully that helps contextualize the cost impact of some of the findings, of the draft findings in our preliminary analysis. I think I already mentioned the next steps are to finalize our engineering report documentation, certainly to receive input from the board to help guide us to get from our draft findings through to a final set of recommendations. As I mentioned, not included in our analysis so far, which has been focused primarily on all the technical aspects, is the financial assessment of these recommendations and those costs. And then, of course, those costs would, those packages would be included in a future CIP. So that's what we have in front of us from here through the finish line for the engineering report. And with that, that concludes the presentation. And so, President Gunther, I'll turn the mic back over to you.
We have some more going already.
What's that?
That's not the end of the show today.
Oh, well, that is the end of this item.
This
We've
item.
got a couple more things on the agenda, but yeah, this is the end of this item.
Okay. Comments? Director Sethy?
No, thank you. Good presentations.
Thank you. It's an excellent presentation and work. Would always throw out another idea. And somewhat back to the future. It strikes me that we have an extraordinary groundwater reservoir that underlies most of the district. And as we recover the reservoir, with lower and lower salt content, we're now at the point where we can do direct irrigation and of larger areas using $500 an acre foot water as opposed to $3,000 an acre foot water. So there may be a demand for generated demand, reducing our maximum day criteria. But more importantly, by being able to install some larger pump wells that can refill a fire truck or hook up, use the fire hose, you have the fire hose installations, being able to isolate sections and being able to supply water after an emergency with raw water from the wells. Because that's our job primarily, is sanitary flows and fire flows. So I encourage you to consider that as a process, as a type of project that we might be able to identify in the districts when we do our ARP wells, have a tap at the well that we can refill a fire truck or use for irrigation somewhere in the area, whether it be school grounds, fields, again, reducing the demand. Many of these are institutional users that are in some cases getting $8 an acre foot water. So at the most $500 an acre foot. So just a different, something else to add to the mix, please.
Yeah, I'd like to make a comment. We are exploring that option on our current design for cedar wells. As the board is aware, we started design on cedar wells. One is a redundancy and an ARP well. Those are source wells for our desal. So that's something that we are considering adding emergency raw water supply during emergency situations. And then there is a line item in the package that we have presented before. That also includes system-wide emergency preparedness, which is similar to Director Wade, what you have mentioned, adding some blind flanges and additional tees to be able to pull groundwater, which is raw water, and then use it during emergencies. Okay. So that's certainly considered as part of our ongoing projects, and we are trying to expand that on a system-wide, which is a line item we included in the engineering report recommendations.
Right. In the case of Pacific Commons, I understand we put in purple pipe with no realistic view of ever using it for recycled water, but that same pipe hopefully could be used with raw well water to meet the same criteria that we plan to use the recycled water irrigation. Thank you.
No questions from my end, just one simple comment. Excellent presentation. Learned quite a bit tonight, so thank you.
I'll just echo what the rest of the directors said. Great presentation. And I'm actually personally very happy to see that we actually did a tabletop exercise to perform a stress test on our systems and have a concept of what actions potentially we can take, right? This is just a scenario and potential proposed result that this is, okay, some of them is already planned in the CIP, but, right. So it's actually really good to see that we did this exercise and we have a result that we could comfortably let our customers know that we looked at it and we know what potentially could happen if when our system, one of our treatment facilities goes down and what we could do to mitigate that. So thank you.
Okay, nicely done. Moving on.
I assume that if Mr. Abreu has any questions or comments, he'd sure to raise his hand because we are ready to move on to the next item. All right. Well, if that's it for that item, then we can move on to item 6 on the agenda. That's general manager's reports. And I just wanted to make a quick report about a change in the board officers for the state water contractors. I think you all know all about the state water contractors. We're one of them. This is an organization that is the largest organization that represents agencies like us that serve 27 million customers, a population in the state of California, and 700,000 irrigated acres of farmland. So there's a board of directors on this organization. Laura Heides has been our director for a long time, and she's now been elected as president of the State Water Contractor Board of Directors.
Good job.
So not only does she do big things for us, she also does big things for the entire state of California and 27 million Californians and 700,000 acres of irrigated farmland. So we are blessed to have her, and so is the State Water Contractors Organization. So that was my GM report for this evening.
Thank you so much. Congratulations. Okay, then director's comments. Director Sethy, you want to fire off on Las Mosqueras? Are you ready this evening, or?
Yeah, let me just quickly get through these things. So the last meeting was scheduled ahead of Aqua. We normally would have met the following week. There wasn't there isn't really much to report on, except that we went through the new multi-party Amendment 6 that we're all adopting, updates to our budget forecasts, and we have a little turnover in the board, which we need to address at the next meeting in June. But we do have a website set up if anybody's interested in the schedule on the actual individual engineering projects. They're encouraged to go to the website. On the Southern Alameda County GIS Authority, ACWD hosted the annual meeting last week on Wednesday, and we had a really nice turnout from City of Fremont, City of Newark, ACWD, and USD personnel. And for many years, I've been trying to encourage bringing back Union City as a participant. They dropped out in the Great Recession due to budget constraints. So we welcomed a Union City representative for the first time in many years. And I think all of us from our different organizations made a hard-pressed court for why Union City needs to be reintegrated into the GIS authority. I want to compliment Garoom Awoke and our technical staff on hand, David and Danielle. They both gave fine, all of them gave fine presentations. And our board this past year has been composed of myself as chair, vice chair, Mayor Hannon from Newark, Vice Mayor Raj Salwan from Fremont, and Manny Fernandez from Union City substituted for Director Tom Hanley, who passed away recently. And we made sure to close the meeting in his memory with a forthcoming resolution that will be signed and sent by us to his family. The number of activities that are going on in the authority is just amazing. And I talked with a number of people yesterday, especially Mr. Purslin from the city of Fremont, who's been there from the beginning. And we both noted that the number of applications and progress that we're making has not been going up incrementally every year, but it's going up geometrically. It's going up a very high growth curve, like a startup company. And it's pretty amazing what everyone in the organization is doing. We also passed a resolution honoring Aziz Nakvi for his many years of work on this GIS authority and all of the fantastic contributions that he made. He was a true leader among a multi-agency effort here. So we rotated the board at the end of the meeting, and Mayor Hannon steps up as chair. Vice Mayor Salwan is vice chair. USD will have a position, and then myself. So all in all, it was a wonderful meeting. And if anyone is really interested in all of the detailed activities going on this authority, please see the website for the GIS or ask for the full report from Mr. Awoke. And unless Mr. Awoke wants to add anything, that's my report.
Thank you, Director Sethy. You summarized it very well, and thank you for the recognition of the hard work that our team, as well as the SACGIS operating committee, does on this JPA. So it's a very helpful organization, not only for us, the district, but the 4 agencies, and hopefully Union City joining in the future. But I don't have anything else to add. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Sethy. Additional director's comments? Are you done?
Yes, I just said you're welcome.
No, thank you, Paul. Very good. Nice report. Any comments, Director Weed?
I always like to beat a dead horse. We had went through until 2020 with a growing water demand. Our rate structure leveraged it to our advantage. The challenge with that is when you go into the decreasing water demand, which we've seen since 2020, and will probably continue, particularly as we, with our aggressive conservation efforts, you're working against yourself. You're leveraged in the wrong direction. We've seen that now. It's coming abundantly clear. We had the good fortune of basically an additional fixed charge is the way we operated it with the drought surcharge. But that's gone away. So we're going to, unless we change our mindset approach, it's going to be working against you at an accelerating rate. So thank you.
No further requests or comments, then go ahead and adjourn the meeting.